Ayin Beis, Volume 1, we're up to Chapter 79. It's the middle of Discourse 20, Shuva Yisroel. Rabbi explained in the last two chapters, last chapter, the three types of avodah, of service, of the souls that are connected to nefesh, and the souls that are connected to ruach, and the souls that are connected to neshama. So after chapter 78, explaining it in avodah that nefesh is action-oriented, ruach is emotion-oriented, working on one's feelings and emotions, and neshama is intellect, mind-oriented, cognitive-oriented. So in chapter 78, that was in chapter 77 rather, in chapter 78, the Rabbi Rashab explained the three things in Shuva, that there's also Shuva for each of the three. There's Shuva that's action-oriented, there's Shuva that is related to emotions. A person who's capable of feeling, of experiencing emotionally, and on one hand it may be more subtle, but someone who's capable of it is like the fruit on top of a tree that falls further and can be more damaging. And then there's the tshuva, repair and return connected to the intellect. A person who's capable of appreciating and understanding the divine. And it does not affect them, it doesn't excite them, it doesn't touch them. That, called hergoshus hamechin, that's the third level of tshuva. And each one we have three strengths. We get power, we're empowered by the transcendent forces, the keser of each of these three levels. And that are the three things called Sur, Mogin, and Mizgov. Sur Yeshenu, Mogin, Sur Mizgavenu, Mogin Yeshenu, and Mizgav Ba'adenu. So these are the three things we say in Yetzer that follow Adenu Zenu, which is a general bittul that it creates. Adenu Zenu, as he put it here, the malchus within each of us is the Nekudas Hayadus, the spark. That we know comes from malchus of atzilus. That apparently, from this now I would say, almost sure, that this is what he spoke earlier, is the effect of keser malchus. That's the thoughts of tshuva, the ava misoteres, rusa deliba, and so on. Basically it's a spark, but it's very general for all souls, because if you go back there you'll see that affects all souls, not the whole world. Ak, the bitl of ak, has an impact on existence. Chutzeni Yisak at least. Primi Yisak has a bit of effect on the Mesiras Nefesh and faith and so on. Tehiri law has the impact on the body. The sacrifice, the offering that we bring. We give of our flesh. We give of our chil v'dam, our fat and our blood. And now, the kesorim pratim, the individual transcendent forces, that addresses the distinction between one type of soul and another. So here we have a summary of how transcendence impacts our lives. We have the general impact it has, and we have its more specific but also still general, that's atzilus, malchus of atzilus. And then we have the three specific, the three types of service. One is action-oriented, emotion, ruach, and the third is makifim, in mind. And there we have it. So we have now is a summation, a conclusion of a subject that began, just to put things into context, long time ago. This discussion began after the Rabbi Rashab had finished discussing the difference between makif and pnimi, which was, first he explained the difference between rotzen and the keiches. When after he finished discussing the internal energies, he went over, started talking about makif energies, transcendence. The first example was desire and faculties, and then he went further into the discussion how this is like Eir and Shefa, and that from the perspective from above, everything is like Eir, energy that does not manifest internally. It's a form of transcendent energy, and then from there, after discussing the examples of sun and nefesh, in chapter 59 he asked, But we still have to understand, aren't there specific makifim? If makif is just a transcendent force, why do we have specific transcendence? We have a keser of atzilus and keser of bria. That was chapter 59. Now we're up to chapter 79. So we're talking about 20 chapters ago. From there he went into that, no, you have to say that makif transcendence also has a relationship with pnimis, shaychus ala pnimi. And from there he began to explain what is it shaychus. So essentially the last 20 chapters have been discussing the relationship between transcendence and immanence, between the transcendent forces and what impact they have on our lives. And this has been the 20 chapters, last 20 chapters. So here you have a summary of the 20 chapters, is the impact of transcendence on immanence. Began with the difference between Tehira Tatar, Tehira Ilah. Both are makifim klolim, both are macrocosmic transcendent energies and forces. Began with went over to Tehira Ilah, went back to keser of atzilus, then went into the whole discussion of Baruch She'amar as a preface to Birchis Yetzer, the 5 levels, makif yechida, all the way to makif asiyah, and now concluded in how that manifests in the last 3 lower makifim, which is bri, yitzir, asiyah, nefesh, ruach, neshama, in the 3 things that we said was tzur, mogin, and mizgav. Okay? That's a summary of the last 20 chapters and the flow. Prior to that was the discussion of immanence. So if you want to make a note of it, that's what I would do. Say, begins with keser, Ayin Beis, moves over to immanent energy. We're talking about 56 chapters. Pnimius, Sagnuzis, where immanence comes from. The energy itself has structure, etc. So the structure, you can say, moves from structure to transcendence, then moves from transcendence to its relationship with the structure, which is where we are right now. And he explains in Aveda the impact of transcendence. So basically, if we had a quiz here, the question would be, what would life be without transcendence? What would life be without the kesorim? And each keser has its role. All the way up before the tzimtzum, and then how he brings it in the microcosm in Malchus of Atzilus, in other words, coming down all the way to our reality. I think that's a summary. But Kemuvan, like he said here, Tamsis is only appreciated once you learned it. You could say, why didn't we just jump to the summary? First of all, I wouldn't have been able to summarize it had I not learned it. Secondly, it's just so-called a Kudus. So now, he's continuing essentially the conclusion of this section. So we can clearly see we're winding down. And to me, this is critical, is to keep the flow, the connection. Because that way you have Havana, what's the point of it all. So now chapter 79, bottom of 148. I find it interesting, I want to just point it out, I said it yesterday. The Frierdiker Rebbe in the beginning is printed, he wrote a Teichen Hascholos HaMaimer. And in most cases, it's actually the Teichen, the content of the beginning of the Maimer. For some reason, the last 2 Maimorim, it's actually the content of the last chapter in the Maimer, just for the record. Like here, Shuva Yisroel, he says, primi b'eschalkus, makif bli gvul. We haven't mentioned it once yet in the Maimer. We're now by the last chapter. That primi is eschalkus. We didn't even mention primi. I mean, we did in the sense of the Naran, but he's calling that also makif bli gvul. But I think it's the last chapter really that says that. And the same thing in the last Maimer, the Teichen Eschol's Maimer, was B'chinas Bas Makabel. Again, it was not the beginning of the Maimer. As he went on, talked about Bas being, in other words, Malchus. The truth is, the Frierdiker Rebbe made those notes for himself, just to give so to speak, not a summary of the Maimer, just as so to speak, a reminder of, in his mind, the flow. So if you read all these summaries, I guess, you get a certain picture. But if you really read them, that some of them are not really reflective of the whole Maimer. They're reflective of a certain Nekudah. So maybe you could study that itself to understand why Bas Makabel, because that Maimer, the focus is really not how Bas is a Makabel, how Bas actually receives from Ima, how she becomes mature, yeah. But, okay. So now, chapter 79, bottom of 148. That's how we conclude the last chapter. What do you say? So very clearly a conclusion of a summary of a section. In chapter 79, With all of this, with all this explaining how transcendence impacts our existence, our lives, even though keser transmits, well, there's a transmission from keser, even though keser transmits, which means the desire for each world. Remember, let's go back to what keser is. What's keser? Keser is the divine desire for that particular world. That desire gives it power. To be more specific, let's go back to the example of the home that he said. Remember, he said when you want to build a home, you have a general desire. The general desire, everything is in there, but you can't distinguish any details because you're really focusing on the matara, on the goal. But then, when you get closer, when you get to action, you get to really building it, you have to have a desire for each particular room, for each particular section. You actually remember, he said rooms, floors, the windows, all the different sections of the building. So now you have a desire for each particular section, which is really just all pieces of the big puzzle. And what that means is your desire, now with God, of course, his desire creates. With us, our desire just directs. But now your desire, if you don't tell the architect or the person what I want in this room, he may not do what you want, and it will not fulfill the overall desire. So the specific desires are informed by the big desire, but they have to spell it out. What is it in context of the as the mashal? What's in context of what we're talking about? The desire is what gives direction and guidance and empowers the structure itself. So let's go back to us. If God did not have a desire specific for Bri, Yitzir, and Asiyah, for example, all we would have is He wants transcendence in this world. He wants us to have a connection to the divine. Like He said, Nekudas Hayadus, Malchus. But the question is, but what about the distinctions? Here we have one person, one soul is connected more to action, one soul is connected more to emotions, one is more to intellect. What about them? In other words, you don't have, tell me how to build that room. So there you have a keser for each world, you have a desire in each world that directs and guides and transmits transcendent energy into that particular world. So, one second. So if you had the desire, kloli, let's say the rotzen lifnei tzimtzum, all the b'ritzeinei, before shiratz mebikayach, what would you have? Yeah, he wants a world, but the world would not have distinction. So that's why shiratz he envisions 10 spheres and structure and so on. So that envisioning is also a desire, but it's now a desire that's connected to pnimi. So therefore you have the interface between transcendence and pnimis. You see, when it comes to a home, it's not really, we're not infusing transcendence into our home, we could. But the point is the same. You need a desire to connect you to the specifics, or else it remains too general, too amorphous, and so on. And this is what he explained in all these chapters, these 20 chapters, is how each world has a driving engine, has a driving captain called keser, a driving desire. The desire of that world is what brings it into being, but also transmits into it the transcendence that's commensurate to that particular world. That's what he's saying right here. So each elam, b'zarotzen for each elam, k'fimuhus hamadregas elam. So what he's saying here, he's going now back that it's makif shayech to pnimi. Let me just say that, and then you have something to ask. You want to ask something?
No, I wondered if he didn't create asiyah, basically we would all be cut from the same cloth. We would all be the same type of people.
We may not be in his machshava, but in reality, it would be like you want to give each of your child something, but it's only in your mind. You haven't really figured out how to give them something. So in Indian, he may still want the distinctions, but there won't be. Let's put it this way: God can do anything. But there won't be any defined, like let's say you have few students and you want to convey to them differently the idea, but you didn't prepare yourself properly. So you start speaking and then you realize, I'm saying things that only a few of them getting, some of them are not getting. So your intention could be good, but you need the instruments, you need an actual planning to say, I need a keser for this level, I need a keser for this level.
But how would it play out in the world, in actuality?
Number one, from creation point of view, we wouldn't see distinctions of levels. It would be very...
Everybody would be in that atzilus, basically.
No, I wouldn't say that. That's why I'm qualifying. It's not as black and white. Don't think linearly. You're thinking in physical terms.
Maybe only atzilus, everybody would be in atzilus.
No, you could have, there could be chesed, gvura, tiferes, but it would be the energy would be too dominant. I just told you, a teacher is teaching, and he wants to teach to different level students, but he didn't really prepare himself, so he starts flowing. So in there is enough there for different students, but they can't contain it because he wasn't mitzamtzim it properly. It says in Chassidus there would be asorim amoris nivrei elam haloi b'mayim berechad yochel yibaris. What happened if only Bereshis? So like Rashi says, Bereshis is like a seed. I want to make sure that I want to say that doesn't mean there won't be distinction. Won't be able to distinguish distinction. Like a seed without a tree. Like Rashi says that everything is in Bereshis, but you wouldn't have the daily structure. You wouldn't have the hierarchy, the structure. He said earlier what would happen. Remember, he said there's a chapter where he said that if you only had you didn't have atzilus. He said, number one, the energy would be intense. Number two, the distinctions are not there. Is closer to Ein Sof. There's a whole bunch of things that would happen. And also, above all, when we go down to this, is obviously for us to reach, that's the creation of it. Then you talk about the avodah of it, for sure. We would have no way to go back. So in other words, God would say, yes, I put you here, you're a neshama of nefesh, a soul from the world of nefesh, you're a soul from the world of ruach, you're the soul. Let's say we even have the distinctions. But we don't have anything to hold on to that connect that nefesh to a particular path. It would lose its identity in order to reconnect to the desire, because it only has one place to go, the general desire. It doesn't have a desire for its particular level. So here you want you want everything to have its path, distinction. So bottom line is, yes, it comes down to distinction. The only thing I was qualifying, that doesn't mean there's nothing there. It means that you can't recognize it, or whatever, however you explain it. That's one side. So now the last 20 chapters I've been explaining how transcendence is related to pnimius. Let's not forget, it's still not pnimius. Remember, all these forces we spoke about, from Tehiri La, Tehiri Tata, atzilus, makif of Yechida, makif of Chaya, Elokei Elam Barachamecha Racham Racham Aleinu, Adenu Zenu, and all the levels afterwards. At the end of the day, it's a strength coming from outside of us, not from within us. Why is this critical? Because in the interface, transcendence isn't enough. You can't just rely on the bittul that comes from Nasa v'Nishma, or Ru'usa Deliba, or even the bittul that comes here from these three makifim that give us the power of tshuva in nefesh, ruach, neshama, because ultimately, dira b'tachtein means it has to be internalized and integrated in your system. So yes, we have forces here that remind us, that awaken us, that give us power. But at the end of the day, it's not enough. It's still transcendence. You need the transcendence to enter into pnimius. So now he's going back and saying, in the transcendent level, there is fundamentally not really difference of levels. We'll soon understand what that means. How does it have difference and not difference at the same time? Because at the end of the day, all these levels are desire. Remember, it's a ratzon. Meaning they're all one essential personality. Remember when we said ratzon earlier? Remember we spoke about ratzon? Ratzon doesn't care how it manifests. So here's the beautiful concept here. Ratzon doesn't care how it manifests, but it does manifest in different ways, because that's what the Bala Ratzon wants. So if you ask Ratzon, Ratzon says, I don't really care. But you tell me what to do. You want a Bria? I'll create you a Bria. You want a Yitzira? He got Yitzira. Asiyah, fine. So here you have a critical point in the interface, something that is divine, but it becomes a carrier of the divine signal into the distinction of existence. Basically, that's what keser is. As we shall learn, and we have learned, that keser is a mamutza, right? It's the mamutza between Maitzel and Tzolim. Why? Because it's the desire of the divine, but it's a desire for specifics. The structure itself is the structure. The structure cannot free itself. It's defined by the structure, unlimited to the structure. Mamala Kalam on its own would never be able to climb outside of its limits. That's why Matan Torah is a power that's more. The others can only reach their source. It's a high source, Sherish and Ivraim. Like Chassidus brings from Mayan Ayin Itam, that the way they build the spring in the Beis Hamikdash, the water can only go back when you draw the water from the height as its original sources. To go higher, you need some additional force. You need a pump. You need something. So the same thing is here. So transcendence, at the end of the day, is true. All this is shaychus apnimi. There's a transcendent, there's an adenu zenu, which is more general. There's a tzur, there's a magin and mizgav. But there's still rotzen. If you remember, there was a very powerful line we learned chapters earlier. He said, Berkeinu, or Berech Atzmei, or Berkeinu, from its own perspective, the 10 hidden spheres. Or the perspective of below, meaning the recipients, there's 10. But if you don't, from Be'erkei, the one who's transmitting it, all it is just energies that are equal. If you go to Atzmos, it's Yechelis. But even not Atzmos, it's Eir Ein Sof, it's Rotzen. So you have here both sides taking place. That's why we spoke much earlier, if you remember the chapters we said Rotzen. Is there a difference how Rotzen manifests in moving your hand, or thinking, or walking, or talking, or doing other things? No. There's a distinction in reality, but from the perspective of Rotzen is just carrying a message from the source. And this is not like it is in the Esespheres, in the immanent spheres. The things he spoke about, the first 56 chapters. The Esespheres, the Bria, Hem Bechinis, Muhus, Achem Esespheres, atzilus. The 10 spheres of Bria are a completely different personality, from the 10 spheres of Atzilus. Commission is Baral, Liel, Perek, Memhei. Like we learned earlier, chapter 45. Whereas the Rotzen, for one or the other, is not a separate personality. Takol Rotzen Echad. Because it's all one desire. What does he mean by one desire? Obviously it's desire for Bria, desire for Yetzirah. But it's all coming from one source, number one. And fundamentally it's all one desire because it's one big puzzle, one big picture. So it all comes down to from what perspective you're talking. If you're talking from the perspective of the desire, it's one desire. You're talking about the perspective of the structure, yes, it's a desire for this aspect of the structure. It would be the equivalent of, like I said, when you're writing, so of course, practically speaking, writing is different than walking or talking. But from the perspective of the brain or the soul instructing your body to do something, it's one desire that just manifests in different ways. Discussed this at length earlier. There was the Rotzen and Keches. And even though that surely the keser, the crown, the desire for atzilus is different, is higher, is more revealed, more high revelation than keser of Bria. Nevertheless, in their fundamental essence, their fundamental personality, they're one level. And there could, okay, one second, let me explain that before we continue. See, this goes back to the discussion of Rotzen and Oir. Let me say a few things to just help us understand this. And the Rebbe Rashab is clearly relying on what he said earlier because he discussed it at length. Now we can appreciate it even more. When you speak about, remember I gave the example, I think it's a good example here as well, of two types of shluchim of the king. One shliach, all he is chief of staff, basically. His job is to give everybody instructions what to do. So he tells the cook, go cook a meal. He tells this one, go send this decree. This one, go make a mailing. What? Dig a well. Yeah, exactly. So his role, all is simply to give the king. The fact that he says dig a well or prepare a meal, that's the words, because we live in a world of structure, so you need the structure. But this shliach, all he is doing is it doesn't matter to him. That's why, for example, the Baal Shem Tov, they tell the story, the Baal Shem Tov, one of the stories he tells, that when he came to Shul Yom Kippur, I guess he wasn't a member in one particular synagogue. He would travel from place to place. Right. Non-denominational. So he came to a shul, and he couldn't believe what's going on. He hears the chazan is singing, as simchadik enigen, as lebedik and freilich. So he's thinking, where's he up to, Yom Kippur? Must be, is it by Marakayan or whatever? And lo and behold, he's singing Al Chet, which is not exactly, uplifting, to say the least. Al Chet, Al Chet, fine. So he asked the Chazan after davening, he says, you daven very beautiful. But can you just tell me, like, where the simcha came from? Like, why did you fit? And he realized he's a Chazan, he knows what he's doing. He doesn't know the words. So he stuck in, a lebedika song to a sad tefillah. Like some people sing in a Sanatekev, they start, I once heard it sung to the tune of The Godfather. Yeah. Anyway, so the Id answers the Baal Shem Tov. I work in the king's palace. Like all the workers work in the king's palace. Everyone's got a job. This one brings the meal. This one prepares the clothing. This one is And my job was to clean up. And I clean the palace. I sing. Al Chet is I'm cleaning a palace to make it beautiful. I mean, it's a great simcha. I'm doing that. I'm making the palace beautiful. Baal Shem Tov used this later to explain to his Talmid in a Yisod foundation in Chassidus, of course. That doesn't mean there's no Al Chet. Obviously, he's not oblivious to what he's saying. The question is, what are you focusing on? Number one, do you believe in original sin? And we're just sinners, and therefore, of course, it feeds into the worst and our lowest. Or do you see that be'etzem we're neshamis, but unfortunately we got blemished, or we got scarred, or we're what's the word? Sullied and soiled and dirty. So you got to clean up. You clean up your child. You're washing your child. Yes, it's not always pleasant, but you're making your child beautiful again. Which is also, how you see the curses in the Torah. You see brachas. It depends how you look at it. Now, obviously, no one should ever know of it. Sometimes you have to scratch off dirt. It can be painful and so on. But the kavanah. So I'm bringing this back. So from the perspective of from this perspective of the agent, of the shliach, of the melech, the difference is he's cleaning or he's doing the most lofty work. What difference does it make? They're both part of the melech's ratzon, number one. Number two, they're both part of beautifying the whole picture or fulfilling the whole picture. Now, obviously, this requires a profound bittul. Because someone that doesn't have the bittul say, hey, why should I do this job? You do this job. Since it's all equal anyway, why don't you do it and I'll do something else? That's like a shtickle bittul yesh mishe bottle. Yesh mishe ayev. So the point I'm trying to make is that, and then there's the shliach who's actually your job is like we said, your job is to do this, and you can't be focusing on another person's job, and you can't be focusing just on the general. Say, you know what, I don't have to get it done completely because I'm doing the general. No, you have a specific role. The point I'm making here is that rotzen is that carrier, an interface between the Baal HaRotzen, the source, and the realities of it. So from the rotzen, that's why it's rotzen echad mamash. Yes, of course, there's a difference of a bria and atzilus because he's giving different instructions. But there's a state where there's really it's an equalizer, and in that equalized state, they're all equal. 1 second. Now, like in mitzvahs, when we say Ashek Kedeshana b'mitzvah v'tzivanu, and then you speak on Latilas Lulav, L'tkaya Shefer, Shmoya Kol Shefer. So there also you have, like you said earlier, we learned this, that mitzvahs have the kavanah closed. That's why al tehi shekel, you shouldn't measure one mitzvah the other. Kala k'chamura, but there is a kala chamura, because that's what the Eibishter wants. He wants a structure. So there's a place where we don't see the distinction. There's a place where you must have the distinction. So we talk about Esser spheres of each world, that their role. If the Esser spheres suddenly say, you know what, I had a meeting with keser, and the keser says it doesn't really make a difference. You'll basically have destruction. If the faculties of the body got together and say, listen, the desire doesn't really care one way or the other, why do we? Then you don't have a human body that's going to function. Every piece of the body needs to do its thing. But on the other hand, if you don't have a rotzen that is equalizer, you don't have a captain of the ship. If everybody's just doing their thing, what you have is a whole bunch of different forces. They may be doing their thing, but they don't have the synchronicity. And you don't have that force that, in a sense, like is the captain that to him it's all equal no matter what you're doing. I'm here for you, or I'm instructing you, or I'm guiding you. So you really need to have these two forces, the transcendent and the immanent. So this is what I mean. I'm sure there's other explanations how you can explain muhus kol rotzen echad. Another way you can say, a little differently, you can say kol rotzen echad. It's all dira b'tachtein. Once he has a kavanah here. It's all the purpose of transforming this world. Whether it's atzilus dikwe bria. I mean, it's similar to what I just said. I'm just saying it and somewhat rephrasing it a bit. So there, the focus in the rotzen is the goal. Like you said before, remember, not chilasim b'seifan. From that perspective, actually I want the end in mind. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, it says build Kalim and then build the Mishkan. But it comes to Betzalel says that's not how you build a world. That's not how you build a structure. First comes the structure, then you build its containers. In other words, you really need one, is the visionary that focuses on the one central purpose of it all, and you need the one that implements and says, okay, now we have to do this, now we have to do that. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So now he goes on. Even though keser atzilus clearly has a higher gili than keser bria, nevertheless there's still madrigal. Even though, for example, the messenger of the king who's going to, let's say, publish the writings and teachings of the king for the nation, so it's far more superior than digging a well or cleaning or sweeping the palace. So clearly, it's much more gili in that because it's much more gili of the melech and much more gili, much more revelation. But still, from the perspective of the desire, they're both necessary, and in that sense they're equal. Look, as we spoke, the whole thing is an exercise of how to grow from our limited way of looking at something, and we're trying to go to a place where there's a deeper unity. Because if you think of our lives, we naturally think fragmented. We don't think in terms like that. Even though the world functions that way. You know, your body clearly has a one unifying force. You wouldn't say you're made of a sum of the parts. And nature is not a sum of the parts. But when we think fragmented because the world is a fragmented world. So really, this is also helping us understand that you have to travel inward. I'm just giving you, like example, a real practical application of this type of thinking. The difference is, for example, someone comes to you and they say, I have a problem in my life. And someone the other day, a few weeks ago, says to me, I've got a lot of problems. So I said, okay, let's hear this. Nothing is working. I said, okay, let's divide and conquer here. Exactly. What do you mean nothing's working? Nothing at all. You're talking to me. You're breathing. Let's not get completely over-exact. Then you start seeing a whole bunch of problems. And of course, from the perspective of the person that has the problems, is so overwhelmed, you don't know where to begin. Because it's all over the place. It's like an assault. So if you're objective, what you do is you step back. You start looking at it. Often you'll identify that there's probably one or two, maybe even one root to all the problems. Now, obviously, at this point, once the fires are burning everywhere, it's not so easy to just say, okay, let's go to the root. But psychologically, it could be the person is feeding it all and causing all your problems is coming from a few key principles. In other words, the training of going into the ratzon of something helps us understand not just the symptoms and the details, but what's the driving force. Even more practically, what does this person desire? Don't tell me what you're doing. I know what you're doing. What you're doing is a mess. What do you desire? And you try to help a person go back to the point of departure. Why did you begin? Why do you have this job? Why did you marry this person? Why are you living here? And you start realizing, 1 second. So you go to a point, you try to go to a point where it all began, which helps a person, instead of getting consumed with the details, you're focusing on the force that brought it into being. Now sometimes the problem is the other way around. The desire is good, but the instruments aren't. So all the structure is not working well. I'm just pointing out how you can apply this in practical psychology. Okay, now he comes on. Remember, he's in the middle. He just said that even though the keser of atzilus is definitely more intense or more gilu yeser of bria, huh? What?
Where is it more big?
I don't know what you mean. What do you mean where? What location?
Yeah.
It's by itself. It's just at higher level. Like I just said, if you write a book, it's going to be more begili your nefesh than if you're cleaning your house. More of you is revealed. Huh? No.
Keser atzilus is more begili. That's what he's asking.
Keser atzilus is more begili than.
That's where is it more begili? That's keser atzilus.
We mean where as in. It's just when say Chochmah is higher than Bina. Where does that take place? Wherever they are, that's where it is. Gili does not mean revelation to others. It means it's a higher Gili. It's like we said earlier. Remember that the moyach, the rotzen. Right, exactly. Because Gili Yeser means more a divine revelation. That's what it means.
He gave a mashal for that.
He gave example in the mind. Rotzen in the mind is much more. You see more of a person's desire because it's more revealed.
You also just gave a mashal for that. The king is the
yeah.
one who's
Right, like a book, or yeah.
But the people who are doing different jobs, and the one who's doing is reading the king's letter or whatever.
Something that's more right is more revealed, the more revealed dimension.
Even though it's not the ultimate desire, it's more revelation of that.
Revealed does not mean revealed to somebody. Revealed is just a state of revelation. Like Chokhmah has Gilu Yeser than Bina. Remember we spoke about the gradation and the hierarchy of the spheres. He said that they're fundamentally, one is a higher Gilu than another. Just a higher intensity, more elikus. Now he continues.
The original desire, that's what it means.
I don't know, that I would not necessarily say. That's another story. No, I would say Gilu Yeser is not more aligned. I don't know if it's more aligned. They're all aligned. But the point here is not, we're not talking about that. We're talking about simply in pure power, intensity. Like anything that's closer to the kav or to the levels before the tzimtzum is going to be a Gilu Yeser. Remember we said anything, what do it mean, higher on the kav or lower on the kav? Kiruv richuk. He says Chokhmah was meir sav bekiruv makim. In Bina berichuk makim. So he explained kiruv and richuk, distance and close, was not physical. It was in its medregan, its level. Now he continues and says something else. Additionally, so besides the fact that they're really one, even if one is a Gilu Yeser, it could also be a growth. The keser bria can grow. V'gam b'b'chinas keser asiyah liyesheser gam b'chinas keser atzilus. There could be a growth in the state of the keser of bria and also of keser atzilus to the point that it goes even higher than keser of atzilus. Now let's explain what this means. When it comes to the immanent energies, pnimi, so Chokhmah asiyah, for example, the seichel hamaisi. What's Chokhmah asiyah? Chokhmah in the world of asiyah. It's intelligence, Chokhmah, but it's connected to action-oriented things. It's like the intelligence of how to craft something. It's not pure abstract thinking. Seichel hamaisi. Sometimes it's used, for example, seichel hanikna of animals. They have seichel. You see, they have ingenuity. Very smart. But it's all about survival. They're not sitting and philosophizing. Survival. So it's all about their lives and action, survival oriented. Chokhmah atzilus, however, Chokhmah atzilus is atzmus ha-chokhmah. You're not talking about Chokhmah around something, how to build something, how to do something, how to action. It's just the main thing. It's just pure brain, pure mind. So, how much growth and the revelation there'll be in the intelligence around action-oriented intelligence? It'll never reach and never become like the quality of essential mind power. You'll only grow, yes, you can grow in Seichel HaMaisi itself. You can grow higher and higher, become better, more efficient.
Figure out how to create a better mousetrap.
Yeah, correct. That's well said. Figure out how to create a better mousetrap. Like, for example, a craftsman who's a very wise, brilliant craftsman, and it's awesome, his wondrous, his wisdom, like in artistry, in the craft of drawing, or in the craft of weaving, or a similar. So, rikum? Weaving, right? Embroidery. Yeah, embroidery. Okay. You're right. Rikum is embroidery. What's the difference between weaving and embroidery? I don't even know. I thought you weave to embroider. Huh? It's more the design. It's not just...
putting on something and weaving, you're creating the sweater. You can do the same way.
Okay, fine. Rikum is embroidery, fine. It's different malachas. It's from the lamatas malachas, yeah. Weaving is irug, right? Irug. And sewing is what?
Like embroidery.
There's another expression. Sewing.
You're attaching.
That's it.
Tviyah.
I just learned that.
Teifer.
Yeah, and then it's the opposite of it is also malacha, taking it apart.
Yeah, immanence.
Okay. So of course you can. Harikol hachmasi hu beina rechel gabe chach gadol miskalas nalas betzem hachacha. Harikol hachmasi, all his wisdom of this craftsman, brilliant craftsman, genius, is not comparable. It's not commensurate. Beina rech is infinitely distant compared to chacham gadol, a great wise person, b'miskalas nalas betzem hachachma, whose mind is occupied with high and lofty and refined seichel. Be'etzem ha'chochma, the essence of chochma. Listen, just to play devil's advocate, you could argue, 1 second. Yes, it's true that this is wisdom around crafting something. And what is that wisdom? That wisdom is around conceiving of something. But clearly he means here an echus, not just kamus, not like more brain power. It means like a person who's able to take his mind and go to places of profound concepts from their source, is able to understand things in their deepest root. That's what he's talking about. So this is not to minimize the wisdom in any of these geniuses or anyone that is. It's just a different type of intelligence. You could also say abstract is one word, but I think also the theory of things. Like here, a great craftsperson is not necessarily going to be a person who's going to tell you the theory. The
Theoretical physicist.
In a sense, right? Like, example. I'm just using an example. Now, obviously, he's also talking about knowing godliness. He's not mentioning God here, but I'm saying even in secular terms, can you make a distinction between etzem ha'chochma and chochma of ha'uman? I'm just trying to distinguish between the two. You go to school, they're both wisdom. There's a wisdom in each. Now, just because it's around shaping something doesn't make it less intelligent.
One takes shop courses.
One takes what?
Shop courses.
You mean like vocational, like?
And the other one takes courses to go to college. Different type of intelligence.
Yeah, but what's that?
Salah, one is Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yeah, that was common in high school.
One is visionary and one is functional. One is actionable. Yeah, but the question is just to say that Chachma closer to Maisa, why does it make it less of intense intelligence? Just because he's building something, By an animal you can say because it's survival. It doesn't think beyond its needs. You're not talking about an artist that's thinking about his needs. We're not talking about your needs. It's a wisdom, but his wisdom manifests in embroidery or in.
He doesn't know the source of this.
But what happens if he does know the source? Then it's esem keicha. Then it's esem achachma.
Then he has both things.
So in other words, it is something like the theory behind it, like music theory as opposed to. Another thing you can say is that a lot of these Greek buildings could study, but what's needed there is also a skill. It's not, you can study theory all day. You can have etzem ha'chochma and never become a master of an art.
Right.
Like there are quite a few like that. Like they say, anyone who becomes a professor is someone who's incapable. I asked my father when I was a kid, what is a consultant? So the classic story. He said, so there was this farmer. He had a farm, and it was a cow farm, a milk farm. So his cows would, produce milk fine. Then this bull suddenly arrived, and the bull wanted to have fun, enjoy himself. So he impregnated the cows, and pregnant cows don't give milk. So this was causing a problem. Every night, out there in the fields, he heard the shrieking and crying and screaming and everything. So finally, he goes to the bull and says, "Listen, it's the last warning. Either get yourself under control, or we're going to castrate you." Okay, the bull promises everything's going to be good. A few nights go by, great, but then, of course, he can't control himself. We're back to the parties. So finally, the farmer comes out with his son. They grab the bull. The bull says, "No, don't do this to me. It's my masculinity. Please, please." They come and they chop off the inyanim, and that's it. And he finally comes home. Tells his wife, "We're going to have peace now. It's going to be quiet." And what do they think? A night passes. It's quiet. 2 nights later, it's more noisier than ever. He runs out. What's now going on? He sees the bull is running around like a wild bull, and there's a bunch of other bulls. He says, what now? You're not even capable. He says, I became a consultant. That's what my father told me. There's a consultant is a castrated professional.
So you cannot do it yourself?
Right. So he advises. How do you like that? You can use it next time. I once told this story to a consultant. He says, another definition for a consultant is someone you pay and not listen to. To not listen to.
Not listen to. What's the differences in this?
I'm discussing. I think what all of you said is accurate. I think number one, it has the element of. First of all, let's start with etzem ke'echach maseh. There's something about purely focusing on pure idea of something that is far more loftier and far more subtle than even if it's a brilliant musician or a brilliant artist, etc. I think one manifestation is what we spoke about is the theory of it as opposed to the action of it. And I think, and we're not even talking about divine, not talking about elokus as opposed to secular wisdom. And it is, yeah. I don't think this is about knocking the wisdom of a skill. We're not talking about knocking, let's say, practical physics compared to theoretical physics. You're just talking about two different worlds. His point, remember, is that as much as you'll grow in one, you're never going to reach the next. They're different worlds. Chokhmah of asiyah is as important, and maybe even more important than Chokhmah of atzilus in some ways. But it's not going to become the Chokhmah of asiyah connected to an action is going to take you to become a better craftsman. But it's not going to bring you to another quality of thinking that is not atzilus, which thinks more in terms of the concept, the theory, the root. That's the key point he's making here. That's in Pnimi. In makif, he's going to say not that way. We'll see. We'll soon see the words for it. Because in general, the reason for the hainu, that means, because in general, you're talking about seichel hamaisi. It's actually a beautiful explanation that a chakav, in the difference between chokhmah and asiyah, let's say, when we keep talking about asiyah ruchnis. Like if you want, I've explained here atzilus, bria, asiyah, like atzilus being vision, bria being like the outline, skeleton, you'd see this fleshing it out, and asiyah the final product. But the truth is, all the spheres, each level, spheres of asiyah function are the same 10 spheres, but in the functional level. So he's saying that's a different. It's still chol seichel ma'aseh levad. U'kamoy ken yuven the chokhmah asiyah liyah shebe'etzem amedregi b'mehus achem chokhmah atzilus. It's also understood, similarly understood, that chokhmah asiyah, being that it's fundamentally a different level, different personality than chokhmah atzilus, hinegamim yiyah bezagdola v'teis v'seir, even if it will have growth and additional energy. So first he's established that it's just two different fundamental levels. And this, of course, leads us to say that as much growth that will be in one, it's not going to grow into the other. It will always remain Chokhmah asiyah and not become Chokhmah atzilus. And that's why the lowest level in atzilus shabasiyah has elamala ben arech mamadrega yesod yen dasiyah atzma. Okay, he's adding to really drive the point home. Okay, now this is azeh. All the worlds have iskalus. Remember, there's an atzilus, there's abiyah atzilus, there's abiyah bria. He's going even further. He's saying not only is asiyah so distant from atzilus, but even the lowest level of atzilus in asiyah. Maybe in the parentheses he's going to explain what that means. Whatever it means, there's an atzilus and asiyah is also on a different dimension. I would say like this. You know what maybe it means? I'll tell you what it means in our mashal that we gave. Let's say, okay, we said atzilus is etzem chokhmah, right? Chokhmah, what do we call it? Atzmus HaChokhmah, right? Let's say Atzmus HaChokhmah. But now someone is coming and revealing the Atzmus HaChokhmah in the wisdom of art, or embroidery. Okay? He says that means the atzilus, the atzma chokhmah within the chokhmah of asiyah. Even that is shalei berach. That's what I would say. In other words, you could have a great craftsperson, and he may never be able to teach the theory to anybody. He may not even know the theory himself, for all his practical purposes. He's just brilliant at what he does. It's just naturally, instinctively. He grows in his skills. In other words, not everyone that is excellent at something can teach it to another. I'm just giving you an example that may work here a little. So atzilus of asiyah is also shalei berach. That's all. That's what he's adding here. He's being very thorough. We have to see what it means. Now the parentheses. Remember, all this still has to go back to makif. Sorry. However, he's qualifying it. This is in general wisdom, as I said. But however, in wisdom of Torah, there's no distinction of levels. But that's not because of Chachma, that's because of Torah. Because even how Torah, because Torah is wisdom of God, and it's nishtalshel, through all the levels. It evolves from one level to level. So even how it is, Torah, that is, wisdom of Torah. How it comes in Chachma Nasiya, be'esei hamahus mamish is the same personality, literally.
That's the same thing.
Yeah, the b'chinas hachachma da atzilus, like the Chachma, like the level of Chachma da atzilus. So kamei ba'ed panecha nasata lanu. You've given us the light of the energy, the light of your face, of your primius. V'yachal liyas b'zeh hagadola, liyas be'esei b'chinas e'er v'agili mamish. And it's true. Let's say, for example, let's give an example. Pshat Remez Drush Sod are four ways to interpret Torah. It says they're connected to four worlds. Pshat's asiyah, atzilus is Sod, the esoteric. There's two opinions whether Bria and Tzira, which one's Remez, which one's Drush. When you're learning Pshat, we know that within the Pshat lies all the levels. It's just that Torah speaks in our language, so it's telling you the Pshat. It's not another level somewhere. Seid is the premise of the Pshat.
Said that before about the Mishnah, no?
Similarly, yeah.
And the Mishnah included the whole Gemara.
Yeah. So you have all the levels. Atzilus is there. Yes, of course, when you're teaching Bechamish Lemikra, the Rebbe speaks Rashi, Yaina Shel Torah. Child understands the Pshat. It's like you seeing the tip of the iceberg and not seeing what's beneath it, but it's in there. And with growth, and when you learn and grow more, you can learn how in the lower levels of asiyah, chachma of Torah and asiyah, lies the chachma of, they have Torah, atzilus, Torah, Sabriya, Torah, and so on. Because in truth, and this answers the question, because the transmission of Torah is not chachma. It's a gilei lakus. So the Malam says it's higher than Seder Shtalshus. It's manifesting a chachma. But chachma, being a er pnimi be'etzem, doesn't work that way. Chachma vatziyah is not chachma vatzilus. Which, interestingly, I learned something very new today. Because I always understood that chachma vatzilus, vasiyah, even in chachma sa'elam, in the shtalshel mehen, one level comes from the next. So it's the same way like with Torah, that the wisdom on this earth will ultimately lead you, if you think and grow, to wisdom of atzilus. But he's saying no, qualitatively they're different. Because then where does asiyah come from? Isn't the chachma of asiyah a product of chachma of atzilus at the end of the day? It doesn't have its own identity. Yeah, that's diminishing. It's diminished, I understand. No, but for example, when we look, let's say a botanist is studying a leaf. So he's studying the leaf on the physical level. He'll give you all the, a biologist, a chemist, a physicist. They'll tell you the physical properties. It's a whole wisdom. But we know that the premise of that is a divine energy. They'll study water and they'll tell you it's H2O, hydrogen, oxygen. A Kabbalist will tell you that it's chesed of atzilus. Except when it takes on a physical structure, it looks like water. Eish, gvura, looks like fire. No, I know, but I'm trying to understand. So then, what's the difference? What's the difference? Why is there a limit? I understand that we initially can be trapped in this place, but why is there a limit for a person to travel from physical wisdom understanding the physical reality to understand the spiritual reality, so to
Maybe
speak.
that's
See it,
why
the
we
scientists
need
can't go.
the kesorim.
That's maybe one answer. Exactly. Good question. Good point. You wouldn't be able to get there, maybe. That's no. That's why I'm discussing it. And the second thing is, you see, the Torah at the end of the day, when it goes into Pshad, the tzimtzum is not as deep as when Chesed becomes water. That's for sure. Because it's still Chachmas Shel Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's still God's wisdom. One second. Hold on a second. One second. Let me just think. The tzimtzum has a deeper impact for sure, and it changes the personality. No, but that's not the point. That I know that it changes personality. The question is why he says by Hagdolah you can't get there. That's the question I have. That it changed the personality, that obviously you live, it's different, of course it's different. But why through your spiritual growth can't you reclimb the ladder?
Without keser.
Or you could say that you really can't without keser. Because there is a fundamental...
Also the botanist, like a scientist, no matter how deep they look into the physical properties, they will not be able to get them to it.
They won't be able to physically get there, but their minds they can get there.
That's a leap. That's a leap. That's not a climb. Step by step.
Maybe that's a leap because they need to accept a different reality. Like we said, that science can never prove certain spiritual realities because it just comes to a wall.
That's exactly what it is saying now. It comes to the wall.
Yeah, but it's more than that. The question is, who created the Chochmah She'elam? It's Chochmah Atzilus. There would be no Chochmah Asiyah, there's no Chochmah Atzilus. I understand what you're saying is a limitation more from the Gavra. My mindset, or I agree with, I understand what we're saying. I'm trying to say is, but Chochmah Asiyah doesn't have anywhere else that it comes from if it's not Chochmah Atzilus.
Is it the same as that like the Neshamas Yisroel, that this is Ravjus and Neshamas Yisroel, it has all darkness, it's Ravjus Teichem, and therefore they have some sort of Sagul and Naila?
Please say it in English, because I don't understand when you say it.
Saying that each level, we find by each soul, even though he comes from a very low level, enclosed within each sphere within him, we have a nostalgia, a chaining down the structure that starts in atzilus, which is Hashem is dressed in atzilus, and therefore he has a suck in godliness. We're not saying that by our four worlds. We're saying that what happens in Chochmah of asiyah doesn't contain that quality.
How are you answering the question I asked?
Because it doesn't contain the quality, and it's not there to.
But it doesn't have any other. But its source is there. Why can't you say through avodah? Why can't you say through avodah? Through avodah, through a person grows, just like you grow from one level, you grow to the point. But through growth, you go beyond that too. Why not?
But there's cloud, and there's a whole idea within the structure and going beyond the structure.
That's what he's saying. So he's saying that maybe the ability for us to do that comes from the makif. The Primi itself couldn't do it. That's what he just said before. Seemingly, I still wonder whether why is that the case?
Mm-hmm.
If the fact of the matter is within water lies chesed of atzilus, you don't need makif for that. You may need a makif for us to break out of the trap of asiyah. That I understand, but again, that's a kavra thing. That's our limitation. That's not here. It's apparent that it's a limitation in the chefza of the chochmah of asiyah cannot go there. Now, maybe I'm pushing it. I'm not saying for sure what I'm saying is correct. I'm just wondering out loud. What's going on. You know what? Maybe let's see. I have no problem saying that it comes from the transcendent. I like that actually.
You explained it basically.
Because the structure can't see it's outside of its own structure.
Why everything needs the market? Every little.
Yeah.
Needs the shell.
I agree. No, I could say it needs it to recognize. No, let me tell you. No, I could say to recognize. For water to recognize that the keichapel benifel, mamalakal alman, chesed of atzilus, you could argue doesn't need makif for that.
No.
Once, let me just make the argument. I'll give you a case. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. You could say you can get the chesed atzilus, but you can't go higher. Avram Avinu, without any siyum u'mayla, without any help from above, could reach Sheir Shenivroim. He could extrapolate with avodah. I'm talking about hard work. He extrapolated through process of elimination that the physical world can't be on its own. It has to have spiritual energy in it. You don't need a Torah to come to that. Our minds, it's obviously God gave us the ability to do that, but you don't need any extra transcendent force, seemingly. One second. I'm making a case, and then I'll argue it. But to know Chesed Atzilus is connected to Ein Sof, that for sure you need the transcendence. if you want to have Mesiras Nefesh, if you want to go against human nature, break yourself, all the things he said, there you need transcendence because the structure cannot fight its own self. But that the structure should understand and be perfectly aligned to its source, just Mamalik element, you could argue that it doesn't need a transcendent element. You could argue that. Now there's a few arguments against it. Number one is the Helam Behester. To really break out of the resistance is not so easy to do on your own. Number two, Avram was not an animal, God forbid. An animal will never come to that. An animal never will be able to recognize. An animal will follow God's instructions but will not understand the godliness within itself. So you could say the neshama of Avram Avinu is the makif in him that gives him the ability to go there. But it's, I'm just making the point. Based on purely, I'm just talking one thing. I'm not talking about, of course we need transcendence. And Aveda for sure we need it. But I'm just talking about this pure statement that he's saying here through Hagdolah, you cannot come to the root. In Torah, yeah, but not because Torah is higher, but because there's a fundamental difference between asiyah and bria, whatever, and atzilus. That's what I was addressing. That's all. I'm just listening. I'm analyzing it. I'm not positive which way. I like to see more before we really. I'm not questioning what he. Of course, it's.
Abraham knew about it doesn't mean he experienced it. It's a different thing.
Okay, but I'm saying to say that through growth you can't come to realize that chesed of chokhmah v'asiyah is
chokhmah. Thing about climbing yourself up where you see things.
Okay, so you're talking about a deeper level, fine, but okay.
But even in the superficial level.
Or you can make the argument, something you can make the argument. What I keep saying about our physicality, our relationship, basically our captivity in time and space. That the bottom line is, yes, we can understand poetically that water is chesed. We can understand fire is gvura. But at the end of the day, we just don't relate to it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. So it's a nice theory, and it sounds beautiful, and we can understand Chokhmah Atzilus became Chokhmah Asiyah, but you got Chokhmah Asiyah. You're not.
The water, I don't see.
Or you don't even know what Chesed would look like, because you look with the wrong eyes. You could say that's also, but that's more like the Helam Behester. I'm just analyzing because it's interesting how he puts it here. Now let's continue on. I mean, obviously he's trying to make the case that Pnimi doesn't have this and Makiv does. So let's see. It's fascinating discussion, that's for sure. Of how you really, because just in the gay, how much you can expect from someone. Like for me, I always felt that you could ultimately, for example, I always give this example. You see someone crying and tears come out of their eyes. So anyone knows you don't first cry and then you feel sad. You feel sad and it causes whatever the reasons, it causes tear ducts and tears come out. You see a smile on someone's face. It doesn't begin with a smile, it begins with a feeling. So someone will say, okay, we could train you that when you see a tear, there's a feeling. In other words, a tear, all it is a keli, is a physical, it's asiyah, gashmis, that covering up a regesh from Yitzir or Bri or Atzilus. That's my point. So one second. So for example, you see it raining outside, you take an umbrella. A meteorologist will tell you it's a result of meteorological pressure systems and clouds and so on. A makubal will say it's the angels crying. It's a ruchnis de kam shach. Is there really a difference? The only difference is, I understand, scientifically you can't prove the last. But you could. So I always thought that's the goal, that you refine yourself to the point where you realize the world is just the outer layer, it's the tears, it's the smile. It looks like a volcano or a rain or whatever, or a leaf or a bird. But really it's ruchnius packaged in a gashmiz container. Which is, of course it's true. But then to say that asiyah then doesn't come to atzilus, that means there's a wall, you can't get there. That's what I'm discussing. Now, is this a limit in the seichel of it, or is it a limit in the hergish? That's really maybe the question here. And you need makiv. You need makiv because no question there's a limit in our hergish. We just cannot really go to a spiritual place like that. We still see Gashmis is more powerful. So there the transcendence. I was just wondering whether, based on what he said here it also looks like there's an intellectual limitation. Chokhmah v'asiyah can never go to Chokhmah atzilus. That was my main question here. I understand that there are limitations. Obviously there's limits, we see it every day. You see, we don't live at a spiritual level no matter how much we understand it.
Was Avram Avinu Seichel Anushi or Seichel Aluki?
Based on Chassidus, what do you mean? He was Seichel Anushi. What do you mean Seichel Aluki? He was born by God, created by God. He has a divine soul. So what do you mean? I mean, it's a loaded question. What does that mean? What about a guy in the street? Is it Seichel Aluki or Seichel Anushi? It depends whether Nefesh Abam is Nefesh Alakis. I mean, Tzelem Alakim. Let's put it this way: your mind has both capacities. It can think about self and material things. It can also have the ability to think about divine things because there's an neshama involved. The thing is, the fundamental difference between Avram and Matan Torah infused the world with ability. First of all, it did two things. It infused the world with ability to transform physicality, and two, it revealed the divine dimension. Shmi Havaya loy nadaiti lehem anochi and Shmi Havaya, a dimension of divine. It's Haba Hatalia, a higher dimension of Gilia Atzmus, basically the power El Yenim Yodul Tachtenim and so on. Avram did not have that. In Mitzvah's Milah, I mean, he had a taste of it, but he didn't have that the depth of revelation, and he didn't have the ability to change. Now, trust me, Avram on his own reached higher than we do with God's help, but that's another story. The point I'm trying to make is, Lefi Erech Avram, if he would have been after Matan Torah, he would have been Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the thing. My point is that Avram, the Aveda before Matan Torah was meant to be that. It was meant to refine as much as human beings can capable. Then God said, now I give you the Shar Hanun. That was the point. It wasn't because of his weakness. That was, on the contrary, Avram in some ways is greater than after Matan Torah, because he did it without Torah. He did it without being given the power from Atzmus. So he came from his own background and worked his way up. So there's a plenty. The advantage of that is that it's more pneumistic, the way Avram did it. Matan Torah had to have a Purim to finally consummate it, because if Matan Torah came from above, we could always argue, hey, my daughter Rabbi, 1 second, we didn't really sign the contract. You forced it upon us. So, but each one has a mile. The mile of a mile, the point I'm simply making is Avram. It doesn't really. It's not really bearing on what we're talking about here, because of course Avram was able to reach. He was like Sefer HaBoyer Chassidus says that when Keser atzilus saw Avram, it says, "What do you need me?" So clearly, he was Keser atzilus on earth. So in that case, he was like Chochmah atzilus on earth too. But that, I don't know if that's... Huh? Okay. I'm just giving an example. I mean, there's an example, as a Markova.
Here we're talking about sacred.
Anyway, yeah, okay, fine. I understand that it's not mamish. I hear you. Listen, I wouldn't bring the others here. It makes things complicated, because the question is, the others, do they reach Bria, Atzilus? I don't want to go there. I was just really talking here, let's continue. Let's see where he concludes with this. Okay, this is Torah. See, the Torah thing really evoked all this, because suddenly with Torah, he says, it just flows through. But it's because Lamal Mistalshos, because Torah is Be'etzem makifim, basically is what he just said. Okay, so this is Chachma. So let's go again. Even the Yesh Achrein, there's a fundamental difference between a lower level and a higher level, between asiyah and atzilus, and even through growth of one, you don't reach the other.
You said that you thought that you couldn't reach from Chachma to Chassid, right? You just said before.
I left it on the table. I didn't really. I said.
This is dancing. The Torah. In other words, once the Torah was given to the world, it is the same thing. The water is the chesed.
Well, 1 second. That's a big jump. Maybe not. That's what he's saying. That's the makif. You're basically saying Torah is like the power of the makif. That's what you're saying.
No, because since Torah can't flow through without taking the properties of each one, and so it carries with it an element.
What you're saying, I would prefer to speak the makif, because it's a big question. That's not necessarily the case. But in the level of keser, there can be the growth of the energy and the revelation of keser of asiyah, that it should become like keser of atzilus. Like we see in desire, because desire is all it is really an expression of the source. So it's not defined by the structure. You see, the reason the Chochmah of Asiyah can go to Atzilus is because it's defined by the structure of Asiyah. Here we're talking about something that's desire. So the intensity of desire can be in action, just like in seichel. We said it could be more revelation in seichel, but intensity, you can be committed to do something that is actually very inferior to something far loftier with even more passion than the most beautiful thing. Same thing, the growth of the keser atzilus can be growth like keser atzilus, and gam l'maylam hazeh, and even more than that, even higher. Ube'emes, okay, there's a lot to say on this perek here. Ube'emes yesh b'chinas keser asiyah keich na'al yeser, and the truth is that's exactly the case. Indeed, basically, he's saying, in truth, indeed. Keser asiyah has a higher power than atzilus. The b'chadeish b'madregas nefesh tiyah hatshuva be'emes zem madreg al yen yeser. He's going back to the avodah of tshuva, because to do tshuva in the level of nefesh, of action, in truth, comes from a higher level. And also the other way around. That the power to do tshuva comes from a higher level, and also the tshuva brings, radiates, and causes the manifestation of a higher level. Right. Like it's known in the Oz Atem. Oz Esam? Chavtes? She says Atem is Aleph Tam. Aleph Tam. What's Tam? The Tomim b'maisav. Tomim b'maisav means someone that is pure, innocent, straight in his actions. Basiyah b'pel mamish. Ma'b'kiyah b'chinas Aleph. That's someone who's simple, innocent. He reaches the level of Aleph. Shazel tmimus harotzen poshet. That is the innocence of the simple desire. Kamosh Yisbar, as shall be explained. U'kamoy kain hu be'inyan b'inyan hatshuva gam kain. The same thing is in the tshuva. Also, the tshuva the b'chinas nefesh magil l'mayal yeser. We have to look it up. She says same thing. This tshuva reaches a level higher because it's the aleph basically. Okay, this little piece here is he's going to explain later. This needs elaboration. He's just adding that in level of keser rotzen, it reaches deeper. The lower, yeah. This is the inyan of the evolution of the kesorim one from another. Let me just explain what that is. So the kav goes like this. There's a tzimtzum, Erin Sof, tzimtzum, kav. Kav is yesher. It's primi. It's a straight line. It creates a circle. Ak. It goes further, creates another. So that's how it says. Misagel v'chezer misagel. It's like a ray of light that is and continues another ray. Circles are the makifim. Makif of Ak and the makifim. All the makifim we talk about. The root of all the makifim, however, is not the kav. The kav is just the paintbrush, the instrument. The root of it is all the igul hagadol. So there's expression that all kesorim, all connect and all revolve from one another. Where's the power of one eagle come from? The eagle above it. They all. So there's something about the kesorim. They have their own so-called language. That even while they're even the lower kesorim, the lower circles that are lower than the kav, the pnimi of a higher level, have a connection to the highest kesar. That's the rule. Look at the Torah Kerach, he explains it. This is example in Halacha, or Gemara, is Afila Reish Gargisa min Shemai Kamahavale. Meaning, even the head of the Gargisa, sometimes the water carriers, the head of a little tribe. Even a guy, you appoint, 5 people appoint, 10 people appoint, the guy, he's going to lead us when we carry water. Even that comes from heaven. So Chassidus brings that as an example that a melech, even of a small category, is like the same as a melech of the biggest melech, because they all have inyan of melucha, leadership. There's also the elam yehei. There's also the hezon of larayis is better than being a reish l'shalim, but sometimes it says a reish l'shalim has a connection to all the other reish. Yeah, Yeah.
Okay.
So bottom line is that all the kesorim, all the yeah. So he's explaining what this means now. The zebezeh, shtalshus kesorim zemezeh. The kesorim all evolve from one another. The keser, the bria, v'gam keser the asiyah. The keser bria, and also even the lowest keser of asiyah, yesh leishayches leb'kinas keser atzilus, has a relationship with keser of atzilus. Yesrim b'kinas chochmeh atzilus, higher than chochmeh atzilus.
What shaykhs to keser atzilus?
No. Keser of asiyah is a keser. The keser atzilus more than. That's not keser atzilus. No, not the more. What? More than chochmah. In other words, chochmah of atzilus is higher than, let's say, keser of bria. But keser of bria relates to keser of atzilus.
More than
chochmah of atzilus, higher than chochmah of atzilus, more than chochmah of atzilus. Does.
More than chochmah of atzilus what? What shaykhs to keser atzilus? In a certain way.
Like he says, it reaches higher than chochmah of atzilus does. Two things, both things I would say. First of all, it's higher than chochmah of atzilus in its root. And number two, chochmah atzilus is not as high as it is. It's the same. How about Talia? What's the difference?
In other words, somewhere keser atzilus has.
Literally, Yesem b'chinas chochmah atzilus, yes, would mean more than, yes. It is more, but it's the same idea. It's rooted in keser more than chochmah is rooted in keser. Yeah. That chochmah ma'ayin temotza, because chochmah ma'ayin temotza. Say chochmah, where do you come from? From ayin. Ke'ein yesh ma'ayin b'chinas keser. It's like a yesh ma'ayin from keser, right? Right, it's like a new entity. We discussed this earlier. And the kesorim actually come from one another. You don't say yesh ma'ayin one keser to the next. Okay, now shtalshlus means not yesh ma'ayin, but nevertheless, nevertheless, this shtalshlus is not like an organized, orderly hierarchy, like a regular structure. It's not like a reflection from one another. In other words, not like a regular shtalshlus chochmah bina. That's not what we say shtalshlus kesorim. 1 second. The shtalshlus be'efen kazeh rak b'madrega sheboim b'chinas eslapshus. This latter is shtalshlus, not kesorim. That goes from one level to the next, in a reflection and diminished and so on. That's only in levels that are b'slapshus. That's immanent, pnimi. U'kameshin is bar le'el perek nun aleph, like we learned in chapter 51 earlier. U'b'amshachas kesorim, however, when the kesorim are transmitting, is that the thing itself, it transmits in every place, and they're literally all one. So the word hishtalshlus kesorim is not, don't see it as hishtalshlus in the same way where one comes to the other, because you see the kav is actually the one that brings hishtalshlus kesorim. He's talking here is that there's a fundamental unity between all of them. They're all in one way or another, they're all really one. It's the opposite of what he's been talking about till now. Keser shaykh al pnimi, makif shaykh al pnimi. V'nimtza the b'chinas harotzen. So we find from this that the level of rotzen, of desire, Ayin Beis chalkus madregas, does not have any levels, distinction of levels. Shezeh b'chinas ershe b'chinas ein seif, because this is the level that is ein seif, infinite, b'chinas bligvul, and without end. The Ein Seif Mamish Lispashtushe, it literally has no end to its extension. Shenimshe b'chol mokim. It extends and transmits everywhere. U'b'chol mokim shenimshech, in every place that it transmits, ein b'chinas eslapshus, it's not in a manifest way. U'b'chinas Ein Seif Mamish, and it's literally in a form of Ein Seif. This is going back literally to the page, to chapter Ayin. Ayin Nun Ches. Where he asked the question, remember before where I said, Omnam Adayin Tzarech Lahavin. Still we have to understand, how could you say this makifim pratim? You just said, if you look at the bottom of page Kuf Ches, what he's saying here is literally word for word from the bottom of page 108. Look. Valkein ba'er makiv guf ein beis chalkus the ma'alamata v'reish v'sefer k'makin ein chalkus b'mshachos be'el m'shezev makiv klos hasal v'reish v'dam b'hashva. And then he asks a question, in the next chapter, 59, don't we see there's kesorim pratim? So 20 chapters came to explain what means kesorim pratim, because they are basically transcendence that's impacting immanence. And in that chapter, he said, in chapter 59, that's where he said that be'er koi, compared to atmos, to the source, or Erin Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, it's all Eir. It's all without a distinction. It's only compared to us, the Keinu, bottom of that page. That's why that chapter is that chapter, 59, is a real bridge.
So where?
Yeah.
Shimon, I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
Hold on one second. And then he finishes here, going back to say, so after all that we discussed, that's what he said, B'chol zeh, chapter 79. How does he say it? B'chol zeh. What I just said in the last 20 chapters, even though it's in every world commensurate, the truth is fundamentally it's above it all. There still remains above it all, and so on.
So what is the difference between keser and keser asiyah?
I gave a whole explanation. It's the difference between that this desire is for a living room and this one's for a dining room.
No, but basically,
from the desire, there's no difference. Too much love. It has both elements to it. It has something that's no distinction, and there's something that is a distinction. Like mitzvahs. There's a difference between tefillin and mezuzah. On one level there is, one level there's not. Desire is an interface. It's an interface between a unifying desire of the source and what he desires, specifics. But it does not manifest. It's not immanent energy. Now, so the 10 spheres, as he said, there's a fundamental distinction. Each world, I gave the whole thing. There's the captain of the ship that tells you all, that says that everything has to be done, connects it all, and then there's each particular department head. Each particular department, and it has to do what it has to do. The thing that we did, going back to what we discussed earlier, the bottom line is that the immanent energy only has its structure, does not go beyond the structure. It would be the equivalent like the air pipe and the wind pipe and the food pipe. So they work together, they coordinate each other. The Ratzon, meaning the captain, tells it how to work. But the wind pipe can't become the air pipe. That's the bottom line. They can be coordinated. Chachma v'asiyah, that may be also the key thing. It's not just that we have the limit that we can't get to Chachma v'atzilus. It could also be it's not meant to be. God wants asiyah. He doesn't want atzilus. He doesn't want asiyah to become atzilus. So he wants you to understand that within water there's chesed. But he doesn't want you the water should disappear and suddenly you should live in the world of chesed. He wants the asiyah. And Gezen Beide. And Getana Mitzvah. And he did a mitzvah to the Alter. He saw it, but he did a mitzvah with it. He didn't just say, I'm going into the energy level. He physically had to do something. He also ate a matzah with a shear. He didn't just go into the spirituality of it. It's not enough kavanah. He had to do it. That's the chiddush that you have both. Remember, at the end of the day, you need pnimi and makif. So the pnimi creates the structure and is a very tight, rigid structure. You don't get out of that. The makif gives the power to it to elevate. That's what we discussed. In this chapter, what he's doing here is bringing it back to remember, after all the transcendence, that impact that it has on us, it's still not us. It's still beyond. It impacts. So two ends. Number one is the makif is not really becoming a pnimi. It remains makif. It's empowering the pnimi. On the other hand, we need the pnimi. You need to have the immanent structure. That's really what he's tying it up together, that you really need both. But take away, listen, it always comes down to this. Take away one and you'll and try to imagine what would existence be without one or the other. Take away pnimi, you don't have a structure. You take away makif, you don't have the ability to get out of the structure. But makif here is but there's a makif for each level of the structure. There is a makif. Let's put it this way: if you ask that agent of the king, what's your role? My role is whatever the king wants me to do. But my keser my king wants me to have all kinds of different rooms and structures. So I'm appointing other kesorim that are really an extension of me: keser atzilus, keser bria, keser asiyah. But it's all one keser. Don't delude yourself. It will look different because they have different functions. Because God wants different functions because He wants an immanent world. Yeah, but don't ever think that that any of us are less bottled to the Ratzon. That goes even deeper. So even the guy that's digging the well has an element in him that he's completely doing with the Ratzon Hamel. But the bottom line, he has to be what he's doing. So he can't. So you have so-called his supervisor is making sure it's aligned and don't get carried away, and you don't think you're digging a well just to dig a well.
Who's the supervisor? Keser atzilus?
No, I would say makiv kloli, Tehiri law is probably Tehiri law and Ak keep control over all the kesorim, and then each keser does its thing, and really there are one. But look, the fact of the matter is that it doesn't talk about it. I don't know if keser can go into Golus and forget where it came from. They'll lose sight of its mission. Like all those stories where you send a shliach and then you have to send another shliach with unkelus or whatever, until you find, because they all get trapped. The point of the matter is, the beauty of this is that transcendence, as much as it impacts existence, it remains above it. So it gives us hope. So even when the skull is shchina begalusi, the makiv did not go into galus. That's also, it's somewhat detached. Like desire. Rotzen stays detached. Let me finish the mimer already. It's not so much more.
Want to finish today?
Well, it's 5 more lines. It's just it's a quarter of what time is it? Okay. I think it's interesting. Ending the mimer is not going to cause you to sleep less or more. Because the end is just he's really tying up the end of the mimer. Let me end the mimer. Yes, it's that long, that's why I don't want to. According to what we discussed earlier, Hagimel Tshuva is the Naran, the 3 levels of Tshuva, Nar Ruach Neshama, Yuvan Mashakos of Shuva Yisroel. This just intensifies that it could be that he added that chapter. Because you don't want to know something? Take out chapter Ayin Ches, you could jump straight to chapter Ayin Tes. The only thing is the end of Ayin Tes, he did add Tshuva. But it's also, you could see, I could also remove that. He talks about how Tshuva reaches deeper. The Tamim, yeah. So according to the above, the 3 levels of Tshuva Naran, above meaning chapter 78, Yuvan will understand what it says Shuva Yisrael, the beginning of the Maimer. The Choshev Kan Gimel Tshuva Sanal. In this pasuk, he counts and enumerates 3 levels of Tshuva. The Mashakos of Shuva Yisrael is Tshuva the Nefesh. The first words, Shuva Yisrael, is the first lowest level of Tshuva, the Tshuva of Nefesh, of action. That's why it says kichashalta when you'll stumble on your sins. That's the tshuva that you should refrain from evil in action. Umashakosov, the next section, kuchu imcham dvarim, take to yourself, acquire words, v'shuvu el havaya, he tshuva de ruach, and return to havaya. That's the tshuva of ruach, emotions. The dibur. Dvarim, dibur. Hu b'chinas ruach. Dibur is ruach. K'ma shekosov l'nefesh chayev v'targemunkelis l'ruach mamalo. 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 Mamalo means murmul, to speak. So, the targemunkelis touches on nefesh chayev. What means a life, a soul that's alive? It means a spirit that speaks. Ruach. So there you go. The tshuva ze'en al asiyah b'pel mamish. This second level is not a tshuva on action, but on the service of love and respect and awe. Here he doesn't say kichashalta. Right. Which is already much more subtle, much more refined. Take words, meaning imru alav kol sisa oven he tshuva de neshama. And then finally the third expression, kol sisa oven, is the tshuva of neshama. V'emer b'zeh imru alav. What did I say? What did I say? Olav? Elov, yeah. Imru Elov. Liyesh zebchin is kiruv shahari yesh bo yediyav asagas alakus. Imru Elov meaning like speaking to him. Meaning it's a certain closeness. Because he has comprehension, a knowing, a knowledge and comprehension in the divine. V'gam, and also the amida he belev, and also amida is in the heart. So dibur, he said, is ruach, is in the mouth. And amida is in the heart. B'chinas machshava, zeh b'chinas neshama. That's machshava. So you have machshava, dibur, ma'isa. That he didn't say earlier. That's not on as well. V'omre, kol sisa oven. What is that? Also oven. Hu b'chinas hamakiv shal zeh kol b'chinas skalos. I mean, kol. This is the word kol he's focusing. The makiv shal zeh kol. B'chinas skalos. Kama. B'chinas skalos. In other words, kol tisoven is going and focusing on kol. It's a makif. the higher makif. That's the kol. That's a level of iskalos. V'hainu shekol hatshuvas ha'elu hem b'keich ha'er makif. Oh, one second. Kol sisov, in other words, goes on all of them. No, but then he said before, doesn't he? He says imro of kol sisov and tshuva to neshama. Here it seems to be saying imro elov. That's shuva. That's shuva neshama. And now he seems to be saying kol sisov and is going on all the makif. I don't know, I'm not sure. Okay, v'hainu shekol hatshuvas ha'elu means all these three shuvas, and b'keich ha'er makif, as he said, are with the power of the transcendent, energy shenimsha b'chol ha'madregas debiyah, that transmits in all the levels of bri, yitzir, and asiyah. V'yidu the mashakos of kol sisov and koyal b'chinas seviv u'makif ha'kloli. Or maybe he's going to reconcile. And it's known that what it says kol sisov is going on the seviv u'makif ha'kloli. On a Well, I don't know about that. Now, 1 second. I think here he's talking more Malchus, Adenu Zenu maybe, I'm not sure. Or he may even be talking about Neshama, because that's where he started it. We'll see. Makav HaKloli. Shakol hu muhus echad mamash. He's talking about how kesorim and shtalshlum zamasa. I'm sorry. V'hu shamakif mapradim b'chinas agdus mamash b'chinas seviv makav HaKloli. What does that mean? Kol sisov that is talking about, because all this individual makifim are all united, literally united, with the overall encompassing macrocosmic seviv surrounding and encompassing energy. Shakolu muhus echad mamash kanal. Because they're all one essential personality, like we spoke about earlier in this chapter. And that's why from there we transmit and we receive the power of forgiving of all the sins. That comes from makif. Makif has the power to forgive. Again, because it's out of the structure. You do a sin, you've defied the structure, you've broken the rules. So how could you've broken the system. How could a system forgive you for breaking the system? Whereas it comes a makif, it from an outside force helps you redeem, free yourself. That comes from makif in general, and specifically from the all-encompassing makif. Which, yes, before makif klali is tirila, tiritato, here, he may be speaking in malchus, so it could be adenu zenu, or he may be speaking about even Surmis Gavein. No. It could be the very higher, but I think here because he's speaking more Malchus. Probably on all the levels. Listen, because he spoke about it on all the levels. And this is Shuva Yisroel. This is the first level of Shuva Nefesh. That's the Shuva of Ruach, of emotions. Imru Elov Kol Sisov, again he goes back, it's Kol Sisov. Yeah, Shuva b'chinas neshama. It's a Shuva of the level of neshama. Shekol Zel b'chinas hamakif. All this is from the level of the transcendent. V'chol hamakifim him b'chinas ardus mamish. Yeah, clearly he's saying Kol Sisov is calling on neshama. He says it again, and the neshama clearly here is makif is more general and encompasses and connected, I guess, to all of them. Yeah. All this makifim are united literally in an all-encompassing and macrocosmic surrounding encompassing energy, and from there comes the power, the transmission of Neisa Oven to carry and to forgive on the sins. Okay, it probably works like this. Nefesh, the tshuva of nefesh, the tshuva of ruach are more specific. As you go higher, the circles become bigger. So tshuva of neshama is already more all-encompassing, and in a sense becomes like also an interface between that and all the makifim. So it becomes kol, connected all the way to the highest makifim, which really give the power of forgiveness on all levels. Which of course is a transcendent force, because forgiveness is transcendent. That's the aved of the makif. And they're all connected. They're all connected, although each one has their particular level. One second, they're all connected, even though each one has this particular level. Okay, good. Keser, summary. And nevertheless, all this individual makifim, they're all one personality. In each of the worlds is a separate personality. And even when there'll be growth in the chachma of asiyah, it's infinitely distant from atzilus. He said etzem, doesn't say chokhmah even here. Like the intelligence around, functional intelligence around action compared to the essence. It doesn't say chokhmah be'etzem. Interesting. Okay. However, in contrast, desire, yochel is b'teik b'maisa kamei b'seichel. It could be with the same intensity in action as it is in intelligence. Kamei b'keser asiyah yochel is hagdola kamei b'keser atzilus. Keser of asiyah could have growth, just like keser of atzilus. Another way you could explain it is, by the way, you could say, who's a candidate to become the king's next chief of staff? Keser asiyah is much more candidate than chokhmah of atzilus, because chokhmah of atzilus is a function. And keser of asiyah proved that it's dedicated to the desire in a specific job. Now you can move to become all the jobs. Just added that into the equation. Here he says nelam. He's qualifying it. He's saying, and in truth, this has a concealed power that's higher even. But he calls it nelam. Before he said it was higher. Now he's saying it's nelam because it's not begili as much. Because begili, it is lower. Keser of asiyah is lower than keser of atzilus. But it has within it concealed the tam, but he said aleph tam, the power to reach higher. He added nelam here. The hishtalshus aksarim zemazeh, because all the kesorim evolve from one another. Hishtalshus here, hushanimshech muhus lemuhus. This hishtalshus is not the regular hishtalshus, a structure where you go gradations, concealment, diminishment, illavol. But here, the muhus lemuhus. The essential personality goes from one level to the next. In other words, they're all leaders, for example. Like the evil age, they all have the leader personality. That's qualitatively different. So the greatest minister of the greatest king is not as great as the lowest king of even of a small group of people. Doesn't have the kingship element. And that's why be'emes in truth they're all one, without distinction. And with what we discussed in chapter 78, interesting, he says, which chapter? We'll understand Shuva Yisroel, the kichashalti hi tshuva b'nefesh. Stumbling is the tshuva of nefesh. Kechu imchem dvarim. Taking words, acquiring words is the tshuva of ruach mamal, lo speech. Dvarim. Imru alav, elov. Tshuva t'nesham b'chinis machshava. Thought of thought. V'kolza b'keich eir makiv zeh kol sisa oven. And all this is with the power of makiv, which is the meaning of kol sisa oven. Kol. Makiv for all. So we conclude Discourse 20, chapter 79, one page 148 through 150.